Welcome to the Mixology Talk podcast. I'm Chris.
And I'm Julia, and we're the folks behind abarabove.com.
So I am the cocktail expert in this relationship, but I also help create new bar tools for our store over at shop.abarabove.com.
And I run the store. What that means is I help develop new products along with that guy.
Mm-hmm.
I help make sure we buy enough of them and help them get all the way into the hands of our lovely customers.
So together we run abarabove.com, a couple of Facebook groups.
Mm-hmm.
The Craft Cocktail Club Facebook group is
And
one
the
of
craft
them.
bartender community.
That's right. And of course, this silly little podcast as well.
Thanks for watching. This is episode number 191, and this week we're talking about the spirit that everybody seems to hate, gin.
So today we're going to talk about why you might actually like gin, and if you're looking to prove someone wrong, how to convert them.
Yeah, I think we all have friends who say they don't like gin, and I don't know about you, but my first thought is always, yeah, you do.
Yeah, maybe.
You just don't know it yet.
Yeah, exactly.
So the purpose of today's episode is not to tell you what you like. The purpose of today's episode is to hopefully encourage you or the people you love to give gin another better chance. Because I secretly think you might actually like gin. We know you like gin.
It's true, I do.
So when we posted this question in the Craft Cocktail Club, like how do you convert somebody who hates gin, or do you hate gin and why? A lot of people said that they or the people they loved hated gin due to bad experiences early in life. Did you have bad experiences?
Oh, of course. Yeah, absolutely. And I think it ruined gin for me until I became a bartender.
I believe that.
Yeah, absolutely. So
I think a lot of people write gin off after making some bad decisions and not necessarily knowing that there is a good side.
Well, and I remember like when I was in college and probably late into high school, there was a lot of songs about gin and juice. And
Yep.
so you have kind of this idea in your head of what it was going to taste like, and then you had it and you're like, this is awful. I hate everything about this. Why would I ever drink this again?
One person on the Facebook group said that he thought he hated gin because when he was in high school, he used to drink warm shots of gin with his friends. I don't know. I'm like speechless. Any spirit in the world, like warm shots of it, for the most part, I'm willing to guess I would hate it.
Yeah, probably, especially in high school.
Impressed.
Like everything's so intense. I think that being your first exposure would definitely just ruin you for life. Like I could see like maybe Captain Morgan spiced rum. You'd be like, oh, it's kind of sweet. There's some spices in there. I don't mind it. And now I'm getting a little bit of buzz. Okay, I could do this. But gin, that is probably one of the most like razor sharp kind of spirits out there.
So true. And I think the other thing, which is kind of a natural progression from this, is, I don't know about you, but when I was 21, 22, I didn't really have the funds to buy high quality spirits. And so when we went to the grocery store, yes, we're in California, you can buy spirits in the grocery store. When we went to the grocery store to buy our booze, we would look to the very bottom shelf and get the handle that came in plastic.
Mm-hmm. Like $10 for 1.75 liters.
I don't feel like I need to say anymore. Like, I think you all know how that went.
General guideline. If you can throw your bottle of booze and it bounces, it's probably a bad purchase. I'm just going to go ahead. That's
the bounce test.
Filter one, right? Does it bounce? Okay, don't drink it. So yeah, I think there's, especially low quality gin, I think can be, any low quality spirit can be really, really rough, but especially for some reason, I don't know why.
Low quality gin, I feel like, is particularly abrasive.
Yeah.
It's just really kind of rough. So yeah, I definitely think that one's definitely a good reason for you to think that you may not like gin. And I think the last one that I would say is low quality mixers. This is kind of like the next step from the low quality gin. And if you put them together, I'm just kind of impressed that you're still here, because like the bouncy bottle gin plus the bouncy bottle tonic is a rough night. That's just unfortunate. And I've been there. Like, oh, you're like, oh, GNT, that's a thing, right? Gin and tonic. I don't know how to mix anything, but I can mix a gin and tonic, and then you mix it and you drink it and you're like, oh my God.
Right, or you get the proportions wrong and you do like 50-50, like half
really
gin, half terrible gin, half terrible tonic, and all of a sudden that's a headache just in about 15 minutes.
Yeah, you're not waiting long for that headache.
Well, and I'll be honest, I think one of the other things that I did, especially before I became a bartender, is I often kind of glamorize gin because of movies.
Yeah.
Like, oh, gin martini,
Yep.
that's classic, that's old school. I want to try
It's
that.
a sophisticated drink.
And so I ordered one in Vegas, and it was god awful. It was terrible, and I hated everything about it. And I drank the whole thing, and that just kind of further like pushed me away from gin.
You've been hurt.
I've been hurt, yes. But I could see how somebody could take some pop culture, some movies or something like that, have expectations, and I think gin probably doesn't live up to that expectation.
Yeah, that's true. You feel like I'm going to take a sip of gin and I'm going to like instantly be in a tuxedo.
Right.
But yeah, not so much. So yeah, I think to a certain extent, I'm not one to tell you what to do, but again, like it's unlikely that you're going to have a delicious cocktail if you're starting with low quality spirits, low quality mixers, or if you're in your parents' basement at age 15 taking shots of warm gin.
Probably gonna have a bad time.
Gonna have a bad time. Good bad morning, that's for sure.
So one of the things to keep in mind about gin is that there's a couple of different styles out there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Julia summarized it earlier. You have hit in the face with the Christmas tree and not hit in the face with the Christmas tree. So those are generally the kind of major differences in style. If you want to know specifically more styles of gin, I actually have an interview coming up with Philip Duff, who is a gin expert, and we kind of break down more of the kind of classic styles of gin. But for all intents and purposes for this podcast, I think there are two.
It's two kinds of gin.
Right.
There's the gin that you take a sip and you feel like you're literally just like smacked in the face with a Christmas tree. I didn't make this up, actually. This was a good friend of mine from college who described gin accordingly. It's just juniper.
Mm-hmm.
It is like you may as well be gnawing on pine needles, right? It's just really heavy juniper flavor. And then I think unknown to many people is the other kind of gin, and I'm being unfair because there's a lot more styles we're not talking about today. So like full disclosure,
right.
Like there's a lot more than two styles, but to generalize, there's the most common ones are heavy juniper and not heavy juniper. And what would you call the not heavy juniper?
So the heavy juniper is typically called like a London Dry style.
That's the most common. So that would be like Tanqueray,
Beefeater, Bombay Sapphire. Those are kind of the icons as far as London Dry. There's probably thousands of them now, but those are traditionally the most iconic brands out there. And then we have the new Western style dry gin. And the difference is with London Dry, it's juniper first. Mm-hmm. It has to have a large presence, or it traditionally has had a large presence of juniper, where the new Western style has juniper as an ingredient, but it's in balance with all the other ingredients that are in there. So new Western style typically tends to be a little bit more like citrus driven, from my experience, but that doesn't necessarily have to be the case, but less juniper for sure.
I mean, a perfect example of that is Hendrick's.
Right.
Right? Like you don't think of, when you think of Hendrick's, I don't think of Christmas tree, I think of cucumber.
Cucumber, right? And Bulgarian roses.
You're such a nerd.
I know, I can't help it. But it's true. It's not dominant in that flavor. And there's a lot, probably some of the more popular styles now, definitely pull back on that juniper for sure.
Which I think makes it a lot more approachable, right? Like, of the two flavors, would you rather gnaw on a pine needle or would you rather, gnaw on the rind of a lemon? Of the two, I mean, both not great, but like lemon's better than pine needle, right? And again, of course, this is a matter of taste. But if you're just sort of starting to get into the world of gin, I think that the Western palate, certainly my palate, took a long time to really get used to that juniper flavor. Nowadays, I love it.
Right.
But there was no going from zero to I almost said Hendrick's. There's no going from zero to Beefeater, right? Like that was too big of a jump. The bouncy bottle gin, like we talked about, was another one in that way, with, again, a low-quality version of Christmas tree, which is even worse. But I think once Chris introduced me to these other styles of gin, which were much more aromatic, which were much more floral, had a lot more of that citrus presence, I immediately realized, like, hang on a minute, like, I have written off gin, and there's a lot out there that is just not as sort of offensive with the juniper.
Yeah, and the really interesting thing for me is how they play so differently in cocktails too.
Yeah.
I actually love that old school London Dry style because it is so juniper heavy. That way, when I mix with cocktails, it makes itself known. It's there. It's gin. But some of the other ones can be a little bit more subtle, which is nice.
Yeah, definitely. So that's something to think about. And if you're, one of the things I heard from folks in the Craft Cocktail Club was, I don't like gin, and so I don't want to waste my money trying out a bunch of gins to find the one I like. I hear you. I
Right.
totally hear you, and I completely agree. What I would consider is maybe post-COVID, but, can you just go to a bar and ask a bartender to taste?
Yeah, honestly, I think that would probably be the best recommendation. If you are dipping your toe into the world of juniper, I would go to a really good craft bar in your area. If you have one that specializes in gin, I know in San Francisco and probably a couple other metropolitan areas, they have gin-focused bar. I think Whitechapel was one of them in San Francisco. But this is a great opportunity to have a conversation with a bartender. Tell them you're just getting into it, kind of some of your flavor notes that you love, and they can offer you kind of a wide spectrum of gins to try to start to get you a little bit more narrowed in.
Yeah.
Obviously, tip this person very well.
Yes.
Because they are saving you hundreds, if not thousands of dollars. But I think this is a really good thing to engage a bartender in because they're probably very knowledgeable and probably very educated in the world of gin.
And they probably never get to talk about this stuff.
Right.
They are probably going to be so thrilled to have met somebody who wants to talk about this. So you can definitely make a bartender's day with this one. And yeah, this is obviously a much more economical way to try things. And I'm not talking about shots here either, right? Like if you're tasting, like would you get like a whole ounce or?
No, usually what will happen is you'll just get a small taster. It's probably a quarter of an ounce at the most, right? And it will be most likely warm, which is not a bad thing. Like warm gin, I know, like I've used that as a joke before as well. But if you really want to taste the gin, that's a really good way to do it and kind of get introduced to it.
Is it fair to say that that's because that's when the flavor is going to be the most obvious?
Yes, absolutely. So whenever you get something cold, a lot of the aromas in particular kind of get subdued, so they're not as intense. So if it's warm, you're really going to be able to taste it. You're really going to be able to smell everything that's in that gin. So I would recommend trying it warm. A little trick I learned was to actually put some in the palm of your hand, rub it, warm it up, and then just kind of cup it. So that way all the kind of aromas get sealed into your hand, and then just kind of give it a quick smell. And that'll give you some really interesting notes because you're basically aerosolizing the gin and getting it warm so you can really get those the aromatic notes in it. So
interesting.
Yeah.
Sounds kind of messy, but
you probably want to wash your hands after one or two. But
on the other hand, I mean, it seems like a really good way to sort of condense the aroma so you can really get a sense for it.
Yep.
But yeah, so this is a good way to taste quite a few gins without getting super drunk or, poor.
Right.
So do give that a try. And I think that's the other thing you can ask the bartender is to ask about the style of gin. Hey, I know I don't like London Dry because I'm just not a big fan of Juniper Forward, but I have heard that there's these sort of New World, New Western.
Western Dry.
I've heard a lot of names
yeah.
for this. New styles of gin that are less Juniper Forward, and I would love to try a few of those. Then hopefully that bartender can take you on a wonderful journey. I have been out with friends, a million years ago before COVID. I have been out with friends in a bar looking at a cocktail menu, and they read through it and say, oh, that one's gin, no. Oh, that one's gin, no. And they immediately exclude any cocktail on a cocktail menu that includes gin. And it breaks my heart. I want to shout, no! Because you are missing out if you just immediately say you're not going to have any cocktail with gin. I can't tell you how many stories I've heard of people who have a cocktail that they enjoy, and then they tell, this is actually a story straight out of the Craft Cocktail Club. Somebody had a cocktail they enjoyed. I don't remember exactly what it was, but on the second round, the waiter or bartender asked them what they wanted. And she said, I want anything that doesn't have gin. I don't like gin. And the bartender looked at her and said, what you just had gin. And she said, well, in that case, I'll have another. I think it was the last word. I'm not sure. But this is such a story that we hear over and over again, especially with regards to gin. Gin more than anything, more than any other spirit, I would say.
Yeah, and it's funny because I've actually done the opposite in my past, especially when I know the customer really well.
Did you trick people?
And they come up to me and I know they hate gin. I absolutely know they hate gin. And so I'll make them a cocktail and not tell them what it is and just say, you know what? This one's on me. If you don't like it, don't worry about it. And they love it, of course, because it's well made and all that stuff. And afterwards they ask me, what was it? And I'll tell them it was blah, 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 this cocktail with gin. And it always blows them away. Because I think they have, to our point earlier, they have this impression of what it's going to be. But when it's done well and, people understand how to mix, it is a beautiful thing.
When the next thing everybody says is they're saying the same thing, but they say it in one of two ways. Either you just can't taste the gin, or you can't taste the juniper.
Right.
Which, over and over again, I think our society has gotten this mindset that gin is getting hit in the face with a Christmas tree. And it's not necessarily the case. And a well-made cocktail will mean you're not.
Right.
Even if it is made with Beefeater, for example. So I asked in this group, I said, okay, well, what cocktails would you recommend to sort of help people dip their toe into the world of gin? And what's funny is, gosh, there must have been, 50, 75 comments. It was literally every gin cocktail imaginable. I wish I could condense it. I'm personally going to say the Clover Club because it's my personal favorite cocktail right now.
Oh, 100%.
Tom Collins, French 75, I'm reading here because I can't remember them all. Gimlet, Southside, Aviation, Saturn, which I had never heard of before, but it's apparently like a gin tiki style cocktail.
Cool.
And I would like one, please.
Yes, okay.
It has orgeat in it. It sounds amazing. Corpse Reviver, of course. Vesper, Last Word. The list goes on. I just stopped typing there because my fingers got tired. Like that. There's so many great cocktails out there. And I think Chris made a really good point about mixing with gin and the point about London Dry, which is, again, depending on the cocktail, you may or may not want that sort of London Dry juniper flavor to come through. And so that's where that conversation with the bartender comes in. First of all, if you don't like juniper, don't buy a London Dry style, first and foremost. If you're mixing at home, that'll be a really good start. You're probably not going to get that super juniper forward flavor if you choose the right gin to start with. But if you're out in a bar, you just ask the bartender. Right. You can just say like, hey, I would like a Southside, and I'm not huge on juniper flavor, so whatever you recommend.
Yeah, and I think the Southside in particular is a great kind of starter to gin because it kind of drinks like a mojito, but it's with gin and lemon instead of rum and lime. So that is a really, really good starting place.
It also looks nothing like a gin cocktail,
it looks
right?
beautiful. It's really, really beautiful.
You don't look at that and go like, that's gin.
Right. Or even like a Bramble, like an old school Bramble, which is gin, lemon juice, simple syrup, and a touch of creme de cassis or blackberry liqueur. It's gorgeous. It doesn't drink like a gin cocktail, and people just absolutely love it. So there is so many options. I would probably stick away from the spirit-focused ones.
Yeah.
In particular,
like the Negroni.
Negronis definitely kind of show the juniper, especially with all the other funky stuff happening in that glass. Campari is kind of polarizing on its own.
That is a polarizing cocktail. That'll be like 4 or 5 baby steps later.
Yeah, that's like, instead of 101, that's like 3 or 401 right there, right? Like
Master's level gin.
Right. When they start doing shots warm, then you're like, okay, maybe it's time for Negroni now. But definitely kind of stay away from the spirit-focused ones, I think. Anytime you add citrus juice or simple syrup, I think it really helps to kind of embrace it and kind of subdue that the juniper notes.
I was going to suggest like a sour style cocktail is a great way to go, especially if it's a sour with egg white. Going back to the Clover Club, that wasn't intentional, but here we are.
Yep.
The Clover Club, I think when you add egg white to a cocktail, it kind of mutes the flavor a little bit. And obviously you want your recipe to kind of account for that. But it does the same for the gin too. So even if you do make it with a really abrasive gin, it's going to kind of calm that down a little bit. And then you've got your lovely raspberry syrup and
delicious.
I should have made one. Now I'm just sitting here thirsty.
I know. And kind of on the opposite side, I think I would steer them away from just simple mixers like gin and tonics, gin and sodas, like where there's nothing to hide behind. Because then that kind of showcases the gin, which is good. But I think as a baby step, it's a hard one to take.
Maybe that'll be like
really
the 201, 301.
There you go. I like that one. Yeah, exactly. It'll get you to the Negroni. It's a beautiful journey along the way. So...
But that's a good point, though. I will also highlight, we touched upon this earlier, but if you are going to make a G&T, get good quality tea.
Yeah.
There's a lot of great tonics on the market now. This was not the case 10 years ago. Gosh, I can't even think. I mean, obviously, you've got Q tonic, you've got...
so many. I can't even wrap my head around how many.
Fever Tree, that's the one I was trying to think of.
They got tonic syrups and all these different brands.
There's so many great brands. I would just say, as long as you don't buy it in a plastic 2-liter bottle, you're going in the right direction.
Right, and I think one of the biggest things with gin and tonics is people really embrace the presentation of them and really amplifying the flavors. Mm-hmm. So I think just a standard G&T is just so boring to look at, right? You have a glass with ice and a lime wheel on the side. But now you have like edible flowers in there, you have spices in there, and it looks interesting, it's compelling. You want to try it. So I think, that being said, visually it might detract you a little bit, make you more engaged and interested in it than it was previously.
That's very true. Especially if you're in a craft bar setting, you're likely to get that great experience. So just say, think about what your mixers are, but I think that's a great point. Mm-hmm. Those 2-part cocktails are not going to disguise that heavy flavor if that's what you're looking for as kind of a baby step.
Right, exactly. But there is so many great gin cocktails out there in the world. Julia listed off a whole bunch, but definitely worth the adventure and worth the try to make some at home too.
It's for science.
For science. So that pretty much does it for this podcast. Definitely appreciate you guys listening. And little disclaimer, kind of bring it all the way back. We talked a lot about gin, and if you've tried it and you don't like it, that's totally cool. That's not, that's you. We're not trying to pressure you, but we hope you do give, anybody else, give gin a shot. Not literally. But give it a try. Try it again.
Give it a shot. Give it another shot. That's a good logo. But yeah, we're not telling you what to like.
Right.
But if you haven't tried the things that we talked about today, it might be worth a go. Because you might be missing out on some great cocktails that you would actually enjoy.
Absolutely. So definitely go check out the Craft Cocktail Club in Facebook. We'll have a link in the show notes over at mixologytalk.com/191. And there are a lot of really fantastic gin cocktails to try.
So many.
And if you're wary, you're not into gin, and you want to give it a shot, just ask the question. There were so many people in there. How many comments did you get when you asked?
Oh my gosh, dozens and dozens. 50, 75, I don't even know.
There's
so many people, and it's a very welcoming community. Nobody's gonna talk down to you if you say that you're new to it. So
right, exactly.
We would love to see you inside, and we would love to see your cocktail creations and hear your questions.
Cool. Well, cheers, everyone. We'll have some more podcasts, but that pretty much does it for this one.
That's it. Enjoy those aviations.
Cheers, everyone.
Cheers.
Welcome to the Mixology Talk podcast. I'm Chris.
And I'm Joe. What was that?
Oh my God! Welcome to the Mixology Talk podcast. I'm Chris.
Arms.
That's what I do!
Big arms.
I'm directly in the center now. Ah! So together we run a couple of different places, like the store, to the mailbox.
This is episode 191, and this week we are talking about the spirit that everybody seems to hate.
Yep.
Gin.
That sucked. Sorry.